So I'm Elinor Haider from Veolia. At Veolia, we solve complex challenges in water, waste, and energy. We're the world's largest sustainability company, 165,000 people, $27 billion in revenue. For this session, Gary asked us to kind of address our top three list. So here's my top three in terms of the recommendations that we have. Bring in the experts, build in resilience, and plan for microgrids. So bringing in the experts, public-private partnerships or P3s can bring in the experts to build resilience. We recently released a report with Wharton IGEL addressing sustainable infrastructure. The report makes the critical point that sustainable infrastructure is designed, built, and operated to last. And operations is really the critical piece that's often missing from today's infrastructure debates, including the White House funding plan, which has basically virtually no allocation for operations. This focus on new construction means we run infrastructure to failure and then look for the federal government to bail us out. So it's effectively just a FEMA strategy. Sustainable infrastructure case studies included here include Penn Green Steam, which is the new chiller project, Montreal's new $2 billion Central Hospital project, which is the largest healthcare project in North America, and Hawaii gray water reuse. So build in resilience. A good example of this is New Orleans, where we've worked as 100 Resilient Cities partners. Veolia is one of the original 100 RCs partners with the Rockefeller Foundation. For those of you who don't know 100 Resilient Cities, it funds resilience leaders in cities specific to their geographic or other kinds of vulnerabilities. So that could be seismic in the case of LA or San Francisco, climate like New Orleans, or social equity related like in Boston, where our headquarters is. Specific to the work we did in New Orleans, we worked with a major insurer, Swiss Re, to model climate-related events. The analysis had to occur at the very specific asset level, so we modeled 200 water and wastewater assets, and then we looked at those assets, identifying kind of quick wins, targeted investments, $6.5 million, that together could actually reduce risk, expected losses by 72%. We've seen some of this resilience planning also start to play out in the $15 billion catastrophe bond market or the cat bond market, and we're also starting to see interest in moving that towards resilience bonds. And actually Willis Towers Watson, who's on the panel, is doing some of that work too. In this approach, we encourage cities to differentiate between being self-insured, which is what a lot of cities say they are, and the reality, which is that in fact many cities are uninsured. So planning for resilience makes you more prepared, and because of the many interdependent stakeholders in the event of a crisis. So planning for resilience convenes stakeholders, political, civic, utility, first responders, and actually enables them to for the very first time work on their coordinated plan. Judy Rodin, who's the former president of Penn and the former head of the Rockefeller Foundation, actually has a great book about this called The Resilience Dividend, and it includes this concept of learned resilience, talking about the ability to bounce forward instead of bouncing back from a crisis, the ability to really learn to bounce forward. Another example here is Puerto Rico, which of course is the second largest blackout in the history of the world, and that happened obviously right here in the US. So 100,000 people are still without power. In fact, almost 1 million people lost power again this week because of a tree falling on a power line. So it's really a dramatic story. The plans to modernize the power grid include fixes like stronger electric poles and more renewable energy. And it's really an example of Puerto Rico will be an example of an ability to bounce forward again, demonstrating the resilience, the idea of a resilience dividend. Puerto Rico and private industry have brought in the experts, so Veolia is working on a microgrid program, solar battery CHP, which will offer black start, islanding, and renewables benefits. And I just want to comment here that resilience investments really pay off. So there's a recent study from the National Institute of Building Sciences that shows that every $1 spent in hazard mitigation actually can save $6 in future disaster costs. So my third of the three is plan for microgrids. So just briefly, microgrids 101 is a very simple concept. A microgrid is a interconnected load with distributed energy resources that acts as a single controllable entity with respect to the electric grid. So a microgrid can connect and disconnect from the grid to enable it to operate in grid connected mode or independent of the grid, what's called island mode. So microgrids can range in scale from a single building to a whole industrial complex. During Superstorm Sandy in 2012, while 8 million residents across the Mid-Atlantic lost power, those with microgrids, especially those who have combined heat and power systems as the backbone to their microgrid, were able to keep the lights on. Combined heat and power, or CHP, which is the kind of system that actually Veolia operates for Penn, is the most efficient form of energy because it allows you to reuse the heat from the electric generation for the thermal power. So we call this the tale of two NYUs. New York University had two campuses in Manhattan. Veolia managed NYU's expansion of their Washington Square campus microgrid so that while the majority of Manhattan was without power during Superstorm Sandy, that campus actually had electricity, heat, and hot water, and really was a beacon of refuge during the storm. And on the right is NYU Langone Medical Center, which did not have a CHP or a microgrid system, and it lost all power, leading to the dangerous forced evacuation of critical care patients, and I know we all remember those scenes from Sandy. So in response to its experience at the two campuses, NYU Langone selected Veolia to design, build, and support operations of its new 11 megawatt combined heat and power energy plant. So they will be state of the art, and of course will keep the lights on in the next storm. The total cost of FEMA funded repair work at NYU Langone was $540 million. Total cost of the storm, as we all remember, was $70 billion, 20 of that which was just business interruption alone. And I just want to comment, of course, from a Veolia perspective, there was 1 billion gallons of raw and partly treated sewage that were dumped into waterways during the storm, another kind of resilient infrastructure, another issue that a resilient infrastructure system really could have avoided. So we experienced, we've already used this stat today. So we've experienced $300 billion in disaster-related damages across the U.S. last year, making 2017 the costliest year on record for extreme weather events. We are seeing industry, cities such as Trenton, where we're actually developing microgrid around critical public infrastructure, and we're also seeing developers. So this is a project by Related Properties. It's the largest real estate development right now in the U.S. They're all taking action to develop microgrids right now because we know that the next storm is coming. So my three takeaways: bring in the experts, build in resilience, and plan for microgrids. All of these, that's my short presentation, and I think just in all of these, we don't want to underestimate the importance of operations and ask ourselves the question of who's going to plan to operate the infrastructure, those infrastructures during the storm. So smart, resilient infrastructure requires these expert operations and partners. And thank you.